Welcome to our series of talks called Courageous Parenting, in which we'll be looking at the art of how to relate to your adolescent. My name is Stanley McColway, and I'll be meeting you at every stage to explain the details of every topic. But in this particular video, I want to give you a summary of what we'll be covering and give you a bit of a glimpse of what we'll be talking about in each session. We're going to cover 7 topics. In the first topic, we are calling it Transition into Adolescence. The next one is How Teenagers See the World. The third one is Why Teenagers Do What They Do. The fourth is to How to Influence Your Teenager for Good and for God. The fifth is How to Deal with the changes that you find developing in your teenager. The sixth topic is on issues of self-esteem. And the seventh topic is on fathers and sons. When you're talking about transition into adolescence, what are we going to cover? We'll begin that topic by looking at the different stages of growth, all the way from infants and going into the older adult. We'll look at the different needs and what you can expect to see at the different stages of life. Then we'll go in and zero in on the teenage stage of life. We'll talk about what you see in the transition, the things that are permanent and the things that are in transition. We'll go to the scriptures and look at Jesus Christ at age 12 and how the environment in that home looked like. We'll look at how rebellious youth were treated in the Old Testament, and we'll make some very specific statements about how rebellion grows up in a home. Then we'll look at 9 different changes that you can expect in a home. Things like moodiness, things like rudeness. And at the end of that particular session, we'll ask the question, is what you're seeing normal? But the bigger question is normal always acceptable? You're going to enjoy that session. As you listen carefully to what your children are doing, you'll begin to realize that what they are doing, other children are also doing, but you can have a different way of relating to them in the midst of that. The second topic we'll cover is how teenagers see the world. We'll begin that session by another quick review of the different stages of growth, and then we'll go into the scriptures to find out what's God's expectation for children, for young men, for fathers, for young women, for mothers. We'll look at what does God expect. We'll look at how children go through some very difficult, life-changing situations like the loss of a relative and how they are able to cope with that. Then we'll look at how they go through what parents consider trivial and how that in fact is a big challenge for the children. We'll go back to the scriptures and try to find out what does the scripture mean when it says that the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. We'll coach you on how to draw out these children and begin to see them thrive. You'll actually discover as you go through this session that the parent has a lot of work to do on himself. We'll look at how the teenager responds to the environment around them and how this response is determined by how they feel, and how they feel is determined by how they look at the world, how the world expects them to think, and how the world expects them to relate. You'll enjoy that session, and you'll begin to understand your children a whole lot better. We'll look into the whole area of concrete and formal thinking and how the transition takes place. We'll look into the parent as a fueler and the teenager as a drainer and how that is normal. And we'll coach you on how to build up your children so that they are not always being fueled by the dirty fuel of their peers. You're going to enjoy that session. In session 3, we'll be looking at why people do what they do. And this session is not just restricted to raising teenagers, it's also critical in understanding human behavior. We'll begin by looking at a statement that all human behavior is purposeful and that people do what makes sense to them. People filter their desires through their perspectives and values and come up with behavior that is the words and actions they believe will give them what they want. We'll take great lessons from the story of the Titanic. We'll see how when a person is disappointed, they come up with a belief system that gives them a strategy. The strategy is what you see. The disappointments are hidden well below the surface. Our job is not to address the strategies. Our job is to find out what is the need behind the deed and to try and meet that need, or at least connect them to someone who can meet it. We will walk through the disappointments of our own lives and the disappointments of our teenagers' lives and find a way of helping them to thrive again. In session 4, we'll be looking at influencing your teenager for good and for God. This is a very interesting session because most of the time parents are struggling with their teenagers to find out, why is it the teenager is always putting up a wall against me? Some homes have everything going right except for that one troublesome child. We'll go into Luke chapter 15 and look at the story of the prodigal son, and you'll be able to see the characters to whom Christ was talking and how this story really fits in parenting even today. How the English expression, the wheel that squeaks gets the oil, is not relevant in parenting, because in parenting all wheels get oiled. We'll then move on from there and look at 5 different ways of communicating with your children in such a way that you can actually connect with them. We'll look at the intellectual involvement with those children. We'll look at the material involvement. We'll look at involvement at the empathy level. We'll look at dynamic involvement, and we'll look at prolonged involvement. You're going to enjoy these different approaches of communication, and you will learn a lot, not just in relating to your teenagers, but relating to people overall. In session 5, we'll be talking about dealing with changes. We'll talk about the stability that a teenager needs, how their self-esteem is important to them, and how security is very important to this teenager. We'll look at how a parent's own security in God creates a very safe environment for the teenager to be secure. We'll look at 3 different approaches that parents use in dealing with changes. We'll look at the rescuer parent. We'll look at the parent who is an adversary, and we'll encourage you to be the kind of parent who is an ally. After that, we'll look at 11 different ways that a parent can be involved in the life of a teenager. We'll look at how to be involved in that teenager's life, how to let them go instead of being overprotective. We'll talk about responsibilities, pocket money, decision making, how inappropriate discipline is more destructive than constructive. We'll look at how to create a safe environment for the children to thrive. We'll look at family devotions. We'll look at the importance of loving your children. We'll look at how to communicate with the children even when they don't want to be communicated with, and yet how to create the environment that allows them to bring down the wall. At one point, we'll look at the importance of influence versus authority, and how when the child is growing, our authority diminishes over time, but if we do it right, our influence continues over time. This is a must-watch session because it will teach you how to deal with the changes that you're experiencing in the life of your teenager. In session 6, we'll be talking about issues of self-esteem. We'll begin this session by recapping some of what we did in session 5, the whole area of stability, esteem, and security. Then we'll zero in on esteem. We'll look at esteem as a word, and then self-esteem. We'll look at how low self-esteem manifests itself in a child, and then we'll look at what a healthy self-esteem looks like. We'll move on from there and begin to see what emotions affect the esteem of a child. We'll look at anger, we'll look at shame, we'll look at fear. We'll conclude that session on how to build a healthy self-esteem. I'll give you 5 pointers that as a parent you can use in the building of a healthy self-esteem. And that will take us to session 7, which is our last session in this series. We'll be talking about fathers and sons. This is a very interesting session. We'll be talking about life as a race, as a marathon relay, and how we pass on different batons at every stage of life. We'll identify the batons that we have received from our parents in our growing up years. We'll examine those batons to find out, are they worth passing on? And then we will choose to pass on the right batons to our children. Our main passage will be from Psalm 78. We'll be focusing on verses 5 to verse 9, and we'll look at how values and how character is passed on. We'll go back to the New Testament and see how God the Father related to his Son Jesus Christ in public and in private, and we'll glean valuable lessons from that relationship to look at how a father can affirm his son in public and in private. Although we are calling this lesson Fathers and Sons, the principles are applicable to mothers and daughters, fathers and daughters. The principles are great for the raising of the whole family. You don't want to miss that last session. We'll conclude by pointing you to the book called Courageous Parenting, from which some of our sessions have been extracted. We'll encourage you to form small groups so that you can continue building each other in raising a healthy and strong generation.